The Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, has just told this programme that scrapping HS2 would mean an almighty fight with the cities of the north. The man ultimately responsible is the new Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. He's just announced that new 3D scanners must be installed in airports by the end of 2022, which could lead to the end of the ban on liquids in cabin baggage. Well, Grant Shapps is with us now. Let's start off with the announcement today. My understanding is that this was already in the pipeline. Heathrow are doing it, JFK are doing it. Are you just piggybacking on something that was already going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, the technology moves on, doesn't it? And these 3D scanners, which are like the CT scanners that people go into when they're having, a medical issue, have been being developed. What's new is we've said we actually want this in all of our airports and sort of set a deadline for all the major airports, set a deadline for that to happen. I went to see these on Thursday, where they're already in operation, and it is amazing. It means you're not having to sort of faff around with those plastic bags. That's all out the window. You eventually, not yet, but eventually there won't be restrictions necessarily on the amount of liquids you can take. That 100 millilitre restriction will go. You won't have to take your laptop out, your iPad out. It's actually going to make the whole of going through security a lot smoother. I think it also sends an important message. Britain's open for business. We're going to make it easier for people to come and go. I think it's a big message too, and it's safer.
Other reports in the Sunday papers today that I'm keen to ask you about, that there is going to be a cut to fuel duty in an emergency budget in October. That would be the first cut for 8 years, I think. I mean, is that something you want to see happen?
Well, so I don't want to disappoint you by not coming here and giving you the result of a budget that's not even been planned yet. So, I mean, that would be one.
Is it something that you would like to see happen?
I'll tell you what I'm really keen on. You're talking about petrol side of things, aren't
you?
Yeah. I'll tell you what I'd really like to happen is 27% of all the country's CO2 comes from transport. 90% of that's from vehicles. So actually, if we can move to electric cars, we will make the biggest difference.
So actually, cuts to fuel duty is not where you should be.
Yeah, you have to accept that most people at the moment are not in electric vehicles. So there's a long shift to go. But if you want to know my long-term view, it's let's get electric vehicles running everywhere. I think we'll get to the point where people will look back and go, do you remember when we used to have sort of gas guzzling, petrol and diesel pumping out, when actually, electric cars don't emit any CO2. There are now more electric chargers locations than there are petrol stations. So, that's a big move. But on your tax question on fuel, when you get the Chancellor on, make sure you ask him.
I will.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll be interested to know the answer as well, by the sounds of it. With all these policy announcements, the trail of the fuel duty cut, you've got the airport scanners. I mean, it feels like we're on an election footing. We are on an election footing, aren't we?
Look, I think the simple truth is we need to get Brexit done. That is number one. And 31st of October,
but all
whatever else happens,
aren't about Brexit, are they? These announcements are punter-friendly policies. It feels to me specifically geared up for a potential
I think some of it may be over-interpreting. There hasn't been an announcement about fuel, for example.
Well, someone's told numerous Sunday papers about it.
Well, I mean, the newspapers often fill lots of stuff. I don't think you all people know this. I don't think it necessarily means anything at all. Things like the scanners, this is getting on with the business of government. And to be absolutely clear, I know this because I sit in the Brexit exit preparation meetings in Cobra rooms virtually every day of the week. We are massively preparing for the one big significant moment, 31st of October, where we have to leave, where we will leave, and we will be prepared as it is possible. Beyond that, I can't say, but that is the number one priority. OK. Now, I've got a really simple question that I hope you'll be able to answer. Try me. Me directly. Is HS2 going to happen? So we'll know the answer to this by the end of the year. I've asked Doug Oakervey, along with the Prime Minister, to do a review. I've said, blank sheet of paper. I've just come into this role. Blank sheet of paper. Just give me the facts. So it could be scrapped. Once I know that, could be scrapped. Everything is possible. So it may be that after this review, you decide to scrap HS2. If you start with a blank piece of paper and you say to the person doing the review and his team, give me the facts, then any outcome is possible from that, yes. But Andy Burnham has just said on the programme earlier that if that happens, you're going to have an almighty battle with cities in the north. And he's not the only person who's worried. I just want to have a look at some of the reaction to this review. This is the leader of Birmingham City Council, Ian Ward. A U-turn would be disastrous. Let's have a look at some of the other ones. Chief Executive of the Liverpool bid, Bill Addy. This latest announcement once again spreads doubt, uncertainty and frustration among business leaders in the north. And finally, the Mayor of the West Midlands, the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street,
HS2 is mission critical for the West Midlands.
Yeah.
I mean, have you had an angry call from Andy Street?
No, I have not, but Andy Street will be helping on the review, so he'll be feeding in his views along with many other people, some for, some, like Lord Berkeley, against. And look, I mean, I met with Andy Burnham my very first Saturday in the job when the Prime Minister went up to Manchester, made the announcements that, come what may, we will be building a high-speed link between Manchester and Leeds. I believe in
But these rail links
also,
also, at the minute, depend on HS2. I mean, if you just have to look, for example, at Barry White, Chief Executive Transport for the North, I mean, he's designing the Northern Powerhouse Rail. He says the current plan is effectively contingent on HS2
Yeah,
happening.
I also met with,
to scrap it.
I also met with Barry as well. And let me be clear, the Prime Minister said the same. Like, we would hesitate for an age before not building big infrastructure. But it must be right, and all of these people would agree with this, to check what we're doing. Just because a project has already taken a lot of money, and just because the projections, even if the projections just continue to rise in terms of the costs, it cannot be right not to stop and take a look at it. We are spending taxpayers' money, and that money can only be spent once, so you've got to spend it wisely. So this is a blank sheet of paper, let's take a look at it, and I'll tell you once I've got all the facts in front of me what I think about it, but I want the facts first.
Okay.
And I'll be going back to Parliament when we return shortly and making a statement to say everything I know so far about this as well, because I think it's just right to get everything out on the table.
Blank sheet of paper on HS2. What about the third runway at Heathrow? Is that going to happen?
So on the third runway, I mean, as you know, Parliament's voted with quite an overwhelming majority for it. So that's
Do you want it to happen?
There. We need more South East airport capacity. It's absolutely true. The Prime Minister raised some concerns about whether the whole thing stacks up. So I'll tell you what I'm doing about it. I want to know that if this goes ahead, it's privately funded. So that sounds great. The problem is eventually those funds have to be, that money has to be sort of clawed back, and it's only one place it will be clawed back from, and that's the passengers. So the whole thing has to stack up. So I've been looking at the detailed information, testing the figures. I've met with Heathrow to try and understand what they're doing and pushing them to make sure that in the end...
And if you don't think it stacks up, is there a chance that you might block it?
Well, look, Parliament's already voted for it. There are legal cases which might block it. The most important thing, and this will come to, in the end, to a government decision which will be made by another minister, not me, within the department, they will have to weigh up whether this meets all of the tests, the environmental tests.
I mean,
but
Boris
also
Johnson, of course, famously
costs.
said he was going to lie down in front of the bulldozers to stop it happening. He doesn't need to lie down in front of bulldozers now. He can just tell them to go the other way. So do you think he might get involved?
I mean, also now, since that time, which was several years ago, Parliament has voted for it, and he's a Democrat. There are a number of legal challenges, some of which have just been dismissed, 26 different cases. So things have moved on, but now what we want to do is make sure this thing ends up not costing the air passenger a lot of money because they overspent on the project. So I think it's a question of keeping a very close eye on that.
OK. Now, Boris Johnson, of course, meeting two Donalds today at the G7, Donald Trump and later on Donald Tusk, which might be a little bit more of a thorny meeting, shall we say, than the one he had over breakfast with the US president. Donald Tusk says that Boris Johnson shouldn't be known as Mr. No Deal Brexit. If there is a no deal, your department is going to be incredibly affected, isn't it? Because of the bottleneck through Dover primarily. I mean, we've been talking about huge queues, we've been talking about food shortages, potentially having to stockpile medicine, shortages of food. I mean, are you worried about all this? It's not just bumps in the road, is it, as Boris Johnson said?
So, I mean, it's 3 years after I was a Remain voter. It's 3 years later and we're still not left. People actually want to see an end to this. So
they want to see an end to it, but they also don't want to see too much disruption as well.
So let me answer your point. So people want to see an end to it, and you're absolutely right that the Department for Transport is absolutely at the front, sort of leading edge of whatever happens next, particularly with those potential queues in Kent. So I am, as I mentioned before, attending daily exit operation meetings in Cobra, where we are getting into really infinitesimal detail about every single possible aspect. We will be ready. In fact, I would say we are much more prepared than most people realise. I've been down to Dover, I'm going back over to Calais. We're working with the
You weren't surprised at how much of our trade goes through Dover then?
No, I mean, it's a lot of our trade. But here's the secret, most people don't realise. The French and Europe export to us way more than we send to them. So whilst you could If you're in France, say, actually, we're going to really demonstrate the point here. We're going to cause those queues throughout Kent. Because the answer is they won't be sending us and selling us stuff at the same time. So it'll actually be hugely disadvantageous. Now, I can't guarantee there won't be delays. I've set up this thing called Operation Brock.
There'll be some delays.
We'll see what happens. I've set up this Operation Brock, which means that if there are delays, that unlike with Stack, the previous operation, we can still have traffic flowing in both directions down to Kent. We will be as prepared as we possibly can.
I want to squeeze in a very, very quick question at the end, because you developed the infamous spreadsheet that correctly predicted exactly the number of MPs who would vote for Boris Johnson. Are you the new spreadsheet Phil?
I don't think that's the case. I do think that, actually, there's a wider message to this, which is if you really plan in detail and if you do things on spreadsheets, for example, you can stand a much better chance of dealing with things like the upshot of Brexit. And that is what this government's doing.
OK, Grant Shapps, thank you very much for being on the programme.